Don't worry about that. You are going to be in for a treat because this is actually Cynthia's third time here. Because she was so phenomenal. Lori, so I'm sorry, we're going to have you back next year because that's what happens. She was so phenomenal, and when I send surveys out every year of who their favorite speaker was, Cynthia Young's always right there. She's our Chief Service Officer, CSO, and she grew up all over the world as a daughter of a career Air Force pilot, and after she graduated from college with the fashion marketing, she went taught marketing actually in public school, so she understands a little bit about that. She was working with an investigative caseworker as an investigative caseworker for Child Protective Services for 3 years, and then, of course, we know that she began her career at Southwest Airlines in 1989 and was there for 21 years before she retired and came to join us in Ambit Energy as a Chief Service Officer. So please help me welcome our Chief Service Officer and our woman of strength, Cynthia Young.
It's your life, what you gonna do? The world is watching you every day. The choices you make, say what you are and who your heart beats for. It's an open door. It's your life. Sam Young. He's my partner in almost everything, and he carries heavy items and serves as a Sherpa when we travel. So that's why he's here for me today. He really is, isn't he? So, good morning. It's such a privilege to be here, and it's so exciting to see how this grows each year. And it's especially exciting to hear that half of you are new. So, welcome. We're so delighted you're here. I have to tell you, when Esther told me the theme of this year's event, I thought, oh, I have the perfect, I know exactly what I want to say. I had quotes in mind. I sketched out the difference between a strong woman and a woman of strength. But I didn't write anything down. I was just, thinking, I thought, I'll get to that. And then my friend Lori Rodriguez came to me, and she said, would you look at my notes and see what it is that I want to say? Yeah, I laughed too. Well, she has quotes in there from people she never heard of before she started this, and I have been to workshops with them. And I thought, this is nuts. Actually, I told Lori, I said, maybe I'll just stand beside you the whole time you talk and go. And then when she finishes, I thought I'd go, what she said. But I knew that wasn't going to work, and I also knew that things happen for a reason, and I thought God has a different message for me to give to you today. And He did. He was just so slow in providing it that it's late. Oftentimes He's not on my schedule. Can I get a witness? Thank you. But as late as Friday night, I was out to dinner with my Sams, my husband, and we have a son, Baby Sam. Baby Sam is 6'4" and weighs 225. Precious, precious child. Anyway, we were out to dinner together, and it occurred to me in a flash. Something Samuel said, Baby Sam said at the table, caused me to know what it was I was supposed to say. And I started thinking about logistics, because obviously it involves this quilt. And Baby Sam said, get one of your cabbie clothes racks and use that, and Dad will carry it for you. And I thought, and so I went home Friday night and started sketching out some ideas, and then Saturday, was that just yesterday? Yesterday, I got out the computer and started typing, and so what you're about to hear is the result of Lori stealing my speech. No, what you're about to hear is the result of God putting His women where He wants them. And before I begin this, let me tell you that one thing that's not on Lori Rodriguez's resume and was not mentioned here is that she is a wonderful friend. She is a decent woman of integrity with a just wicked sense of humor. And she makes life for me at Ambit much richer. Thank you. Okay, so let me tell you a little story. A lot of you know already, well, everybody now because Esther mentioned it. My father was a career military pilot, and that meant that we lived all over the place. We moved every 2 or 3 years. So I lived everywhere from Illinois to Mississippi, Scotland, Washington State, did I say Mississippi? Yeah. Illinois again, Japan, and maybe that was it. A couple of places twice. So wherever we were, whatever was going on, whether my father was overseas flying combat missions for a year and we didn't see him, it wasn't then like it is now. There was no email, there was no Skype. When Daddy left, Daddy was gone. And we had letters, and we had reel-to-reel tapes. Y'all remember reel-to-reel tapes? And I can remember those tapes would come once a week. Letters would come every day. Sometimes they wouldn't come every day. They'd come in a bundle, and we'd be worried while those letters just stacked up somewhere. But I can remember watching my mother with a big set of headset and earphones on, listening to those tapes, because he would talk to us first, all of us, the 3 children and my mother, and then he'd say, "Okay, kids, I'm going to talk to your mommy now." And she would know to put the headset on, and I knew he was telling her words of love, because she'd sit there and weep as she listened. Sorry, I've got tissue too. But that her role was Mrs. Colonel Williams. That was her role. That's what she did. She stood by her man, whether her man was in Vietnam, whether he was in Thailand, whether he was commanding a squadron of pilots or teaching other pilots how to fly. Her role was to provide the support and counsel and a care for him that refreshed and enriched him and allowed him to go do what he did, and to ensure that his home was a place that when he came home he could rest, and that his children were being reared into the kind of people he wanted them to be. So that was my mom's job. She worked inside the home almost all of our lives. Periodically she'd get sick of us and go get a job somewhere, but then she'd get sick of them and come home. I remember she worked one year, she wanted to make extra Christmas money, and she worked at JCPenney in the catalog department for about 4 weeks, and came home and she said, "Those people are more childish than you people." Okay, Mom's home. I remember when I was very young, and I am older than Lori. I'll tell you how old I am. I'm going to be 56 tomorrow. This is what you have to look forward to. Oh, you're so sweet. Oh, thank you. Y'all are very sweet. Thank you. Well, when I was I think I was 11, Dwight Eisenhower died, and we were living at that time in southern Illinois in a small town called O'Fallon. Anybody know O'Fallon, Illinois? OTH Panthers, go! My mother knew that his funeral train was actually going to pass through the little town of O'Fallon, and people would be at the tracks paying their respects. And she took me down there with her. I don't know. I mean, she took me out of school, and we went down there, and we stood, and as that car came by, you could see his coffin draped in the flag of the country he served. And you could see, seated beside that coffin, his wife. And my mother turned to me and said, "That's where she's been for more than 50 years. That's been her job, is to be beside him. And her duty to this country, she's still doing." And that just stuck in my head, and I knew it was important, but I wasn't sure why. And so that you know, that was pretty much out of character from my mother. She was not a feminist by anybody's standards necessarily. neither she nor my father ever expected anything but the best from us, though. And in that way, I think that my mother was very much a feminist, because as far as she was concerned, and my father, gender had absolutely nothing to do with expectation. Both of them assumed that we would, and I think I've told some of you this, my dad used to tell me, identify the target, acquire the target, take the target. So identify, as you know, is just scan it and decide what am I going for. There's my target. Acquiring it is when you lock onto it. And taking it is you just take it. So there was never any question about whether my sister and I, there were three of us, my sister, my brother, and myself, and neither of our parents ever thought that gender had anything to do with achievement. So in that way, I think my mother was a feminist. But she told me later that when I asked her about the Eisenhower train, she said, I realized right then that Mrs. Eisenhower was not the only first lady who was never really recognized for what she had done. And so this quilt that I show you is a work of art, actually, that she created after she started thinking about what other first ladies there might be who have achieved but not been recognized. And let me find some of the names on here. She told me that she wanted to talk about not only women that had public faces and actual first ladies, but also women who saw discouragement or any kind of obstacle and they were able to overcome it. I'll go back for a second to talk about my parents, both of them. I was talking to them yesterday. I went to their house yesterday to pick up the quilt, and I was telling my dad basically what I was going to talk about. And I said one of the things that I wanted to say was that neither one of you ever thought that any obstacle was worth even really slowing us down. If it was a lack of knowledge, then you told us, go get some. And if it was our own self-doubt, then you told us, get over it. And if it was the disapproval of somebody else, disregard it. And Daddy said, yeah, that's right. That's what I taught you. He said, how's it working so far? So after we saw the train and after my mother gave this thought, this actually happened probably 20 years after the train. She began work on this. My mother is a quilter, and what you see here is not her finest, most intricate piece of work. She told me yesterday that she wanted to do something that was very simple so that the names of the women that are on this quilt would be highlighted. Because actually she is quite an artist, and her work graces all of our homes. All of her kids have pieces where she, anybody quilt? So you'll understand she pieces by hand, she quilts by hand, she backs and binds by hand. Every bit of it, tiny, tiny stitches, and it is artistry. And what I love about it is a woman's art form. And it is an art form that was created by women who had nothing but scraps and very little time even, and yet they were able to make something beautiful. So this particular work of art came about after she identified women that she thought were first ladies in some way or another. So on her list was Sally Ride, the first woman astronaut, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman Supreme Court Justice, Annette Strauss, who at the time was the mayor of Dallas, Barbara Jordan, the first African American elected to the Texas Senate after Reconstruction, and the first Southern black woman elected to the United States House of Representatives. Rosa Parks, the woman who refused to be disrespected and take her seat at the back of the bus. And various other women in my mother's life who were not public figures, but like her mother, and you know I talked to you last year about my grandmother, Nanny. She actually started a business in a time when women just didn't do that. And she employed a lot of other women when women just didn't do that. And lives were enriched because of the decisions she made and her business acumen. So in my mom's mind, she was a first lady. One of my mother's aunts is on here because in the midst of a depression, she was left a widow at 23 with 4 small children. She took over her husband's sharecrop piece of land. She hoed cotton, picked cotton, took care of 4 children, got them all through school. One is a doctor, one was an attorney, and the others are successful in their own right. And she said, that's a first lady. That's a woman who did not let anything slow her down. So no matter what these women did, whether they had public accolades or their accomplishments were more personal and private, the one thing that binds them all together is that they were women of strength. So the way she did this quilt, she took a white square fabric, excuse me, and she sent it to every woman on her list. And she sent a letter, and she said, here's what I want to do. I just want to make this piece of art that honors first ladies. And I'd like for you to autograph this square and send it back to me. And if you'd like, send a story or a letter, something that says something about your journey as a woman. And she got virtually every square back that she sent out, with the exception of Jacqueline Onassis. Her personal assistant called my mother and she said, I'm sure you'll understand she has a personal policy that precludes her from participating. If she signed this, she'd be signing things the rest of her life. And my mother said to me yesterday, what else did she have to do, really? I mean, but that was the only living first lady at the time who did not send it back. So she's got everybody on here. In fact, Margaret Truman Daniels, who was the daughter of President Truman, she signed on behalf of her mother. And every other living first lady up to Barbara Bush, which is when my mother completed this, is on this quilt. And every one of them sent a little letter or a note along with their signature to authenticate it and to tell a story. Some of them actually called her at her home to talk to her about what she was doing. Sandra Day O'Connor phoned the house to ask. First, she wanted to know, is this for real? And then she wanted to talk about the project. Helen Hayes, First Lady of Theater, called my mother called her. She called information and got her number out of information. She lived in Nyack, New York, and my mother just called information. So Helen Hayes was like, what? How did you get this number? So she had some really interesting conversations. And I will just mention this too. Joanne, which is what I call my mother half the time, she never really saw any obstacle for herself either. She never thought in terms of glass ceiling or they won't answer the phone or nobody will be interested in this. She just acquired the target and took it. So that's how the quilt happened. So when she got the squares back, what she did was she embroidered with tiny stitches over every signature, and she put it together. So what you see here is the result of her creativity and her artistry. And these are 30 women on here. There's the first general officer in every one of the branches of service, the first admiral in the Navy, the first general in the Air Force, the first woman general in the Army. There, as I said, there's Sally Ride. There are titans of business, people in politics, Eddie Bernice Johnson. There are women who made their mark and who acquired the target. Most of these women, as I said, they're all strong women. They all made positive differences in the lives of others. Many of them are gone now. But what they've done ripples on. And the ones who are still with us continue to make positive differences in the lives of others. Some of these women suffered deep, deep grief, but they only used it to allow them to know how to comfort others. Some of the women were victims of gross injustice, but they rose above that, and they helped lead a nation out of the shame of segregation. Some of these women were misquoted, misrepresented, marginalized, and maligned, but they didn't allow that to stop them from doing what they knew they needed to do. It didn't stop them from loving the people who set themselves up as their enemies and continuing to do what they knew God had called them to do. Some women on this quilt were told, this isn't your turf, you don't belong here. They graciously and competently pitched their tents on that turf anyway. And they went on to make a positive difference in the lives of others. Some of these women, when they were told, you can't do that, they took it as a challenge. And they piloted rocket ships into space. They commanded ships. They healed people in naval hospitals all over the world. This is the kind of heritage that we have, ladies. This is who we are. These are the people we come from. Many of these women did these things while they took care of husbands, children, ailing parents. They volunteered at their church, in their children's schools. You know that old saying about, I think Ginger Rogers had to do everything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels. Amen. So what I really want you to see on this quilt, beyond my mother's creativity and beyond her artistry, this is a message from 30 women of accomplishment, women of strength, women of integrity, who are saying to you, persevere, follow your dream. Do not listen to anybody who wants to marginalize, malign, misdirect, or ignore you. Don't be discouraged. If your intent is to serve others and to leverage the gifts that God has invested in you to make a positive difference in the lives of others, do it. Be a first lady.